All right, I'm done tinkering with the setup. Every week I'm doing something slightly different, even in how I set up this live stream. And so I was doing all that, trying to get everything set up right, and of course have zero topic for today. So I would love to hear what you'd like me to discuss. So feel free to start typing in the chat, give me a heads up, and we'll tackle a few topics today that you got to choose. Hi, Synthetic Reef, you are first. Good job. I want to welcome you to the studio. This is where I do all my work. I sell products on my website that are, look at that, it's right in the middle of my face. It's perfect. I'll put it over here for a second here. These are things that I sell. You can see them in the background behind me. I support well, this is how I support myself. I do YouTube videos and I sell dry goods and I build things out of acrylic. So if you are needing something for your aquarium, please feel free to shop on my site. You are supporting the channel. You are feeding Spock, which is my NASA tang I've had since 2004. You're feeding Jack, my dog, and you're feeding me. And so that is the pitch for there. I will go ahead and remove that for now because you actually see it in the background. And then I want to go ahead, while we're at it, I'll just throw this on the screen as well. What is it? Yes. If you aren't a member of Club Milos Reef on Facebook, I would welcome you to join. We have nearly 9,000 members. We are nice people that get along with everyone. We have a rule, you cannot be mean to others. And I mentioned this last week, and I'm just reminding you, it's just supposed to be a peaceful place. And out of almost 4 years of running this club on Facebook, we've had to ban like 2 people. So that's a pretty good run, I mean, when you think about it. And I'm not looking for people to want to get banned. I am just saying, you know, for the most part, people that join are wanting to learn more and be successful so that they can have a pretty tank too. And that is the whole purpose of this channel, is to help educate you and give you that information, that arsenal of tools that will allow you to know how to handle various things that happen in your tank. And we do these live streams to discuss these things as well, but that's once a week, where the group is available all week long, where you can talk and ask questions, post pictures, share videos, explain what's going on with your equipment. We can help you troubleshoot it sometimes. And we can just be there to assist you all week long. But on the Saturday live stream, we have about an hour to 2 hours together. I answer your questions. I address some I usually have a topic. This week, I have failed you. I'm getting so many things done and knocked out that it's kind of a shame that I'm behind with a little bit of stuff. I mean, you would think, oh, everything would be fine here in this situation. By the way, I'm looking at my microphone to make sure I'm not clipping too badly. And I don't know. Let's see. I see a little red light, but I'm hoping not to see something on here on my screen. Okay, so let me scroll up and see some of your comments while I was chatting. And then I need a sip of my coffee while it's still warm. Yeah, that's the good stuff. I found some creamer at Aldi. I really like, it's a peppermint. I think it's a peppermint mocha creamer. I really like it, but it usually makes my stomach hurt. I've actually had to call them before and said, is there any chance this is spoiled because it's killing me? And they said no, and they sent me coupons for more. So anyway, I found a different version at Aldi that is made with almond milk, no dairy, and I was like, oh, what do you know? And it's not like I have a dairy intolerance, but apparently I have an intolerance to that creamer, but I love the flavor. And it reminds me of my father, who likes a certain dinner. He'd only have it once a year, but it would put him on the toilet all night. He would say, it's totally worth it. See, this is where I come from. This is my heritage. Okay, first question asked on the screen here is Ryan says, are you still happy with your skies? I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger. Actually, I am, yeah. So the Sky is a light fixture from Neptune Systems. I installed them, I think about 18 months ago, give or take a month. And the minute I installed them and saw what they look like, I said I should have done this way sooner, except they didn't exist yet. I had the option for other brands that were on the market, but that wasn't appealing to me. I already had metal halides that worked perfectly fine. I had backup bulbs. I had reflectors that were still in perfect shape because I cleaned them every few months. I had ballast with backup ballast, so I had no reason to change the lighting. But year after year, you know, the thought was, well, is Mark ever going to switch to LEDs? Is that ever going to happen? And I just felt like, well, I don't really need it to happen. I mean, you know, I'm not trying to be old school. I'm very happy with the lights I have, and it grows corals. But when Neptune reached out to me and said, would you be interested in putting skies over your tank? I, for the first time in my life, said yes. And the reason I said yes is because they weren't available yet. They were a brand new product. And I thought this could be a really cool video to talk about. And for once, I'm not the last guy in the hobby trying out some new gear. So I did say yes. And then I had to wait 4 or 5 months until they were actually released. And I got the physical first box, or 3, that were packaged before any customers did, before they hit BRS, before they hit any of the market. I got to do the actual unboxing. And so it's a super long video on this channel if you want to watch it. And I tried to answer as many questions as possible because there was no other video about that light fixture on the market. So it's kind of an infomercial. It was really more about me trying to make sure I cover all the bases. And I'm very happy with it. I've sold quite a few out of my shop. If that's something you're interested in getting, let me know. I just had some recently in inventory that sold, so I have to get more. So I don't have any on the shelf at this moment, but I can get you some. So if you need them for your tank, let me know. Now, how do I feel about them? I love them. And why do I love them? Because I can change the color by flipping a switch on my phone. It's just so easy. And that is something that I couldn't do with metal halides. Metal halides, they're on, they're off. And even with the twin arcs, which they would turn off from 10K and then turn back on as a 20K bulb, that one right there was very appealing to me because I had that color, but that was the only 2 colors I could ever have. So it was a matter of toggling the light off for 1 minute and turn it back on and get the new spectrum. But in the end, I just wanted more, and the skies definitely filled that need. Now, there are 4 color channels that you can adjust on there instead of like 6 like some other brands, and maybe even more with other brands. But the principle is that it's already mixed to a certain degree to where you only need 4 sliders. And I have my own, I've picked a couple of color schemes that they've included, you know, for a couple of hours a day, and then it goes into custom, which is the color I liked. And there's several customs, and then it goes back to, you know, a built-in like AB plus or whatever. And then finally, it goes to the super crazy deep blue that I like to have right before bedtime. And I really like that schedule. And if someone has Apex Fusion and has the skies, they can literally go into Fusion on their own phone and go into Sky and then go into Schemes, and they can find mine. Is it Scheme or Scheme? It's Scheme. So if you wanted to try out one of my configurations, you could. And you can just see if you like it. Some people said, man, I really like Mark's. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. That's nice. There's quite a few choices in there. You can mimic Terrence's tank. You can probably mimic Dwayne's. You know, I've got mine. There's several on there, and then there's some default ones. And if you don't own the Apex, but you just want the lights, you can get the lights and you can run them Bluetooth to your phone. They don't need the Aquarium controller. They also do not need to be plugged into a controller. They can be plugged into the wall because the communication happens through either Bluetooth or through an Aquabus cable that would then talk to the Apex itself. So, am I happy? Yes. And I like to change the spectrum when I do my live streams to a color that looks better for the camera. And then, you know, there's times where I need to just switch the lights, and I can. And there's times where I just leave it alone and just enjoy the reef for what it is. Problem Prone says, I have a thriving refugium with Catamorpha, and I won a Clearwater CW50 during Jake Adams' auction. Should I add it as well, even though it's undersized for my 200-gallon system? Well, if it's undersized, then you definitely could add it. I mean, I'm running a Refugium and a algae turf scrubber as well, and they both are doing different jobs. And, you know, I really thought the algae turf scrubber would just destroy my Refugium, but that isn't what happened. So I'm not going to say don't do it. I mean, you want it. Go enjoy it. Go check it out. Hopefully you got the newest style, which has been upgraded. There's a really cool feature. I had Josh give me one of his brand new in the box Clearwater scrubbers that I thought I would do a quick video and share it on the web, and I still haven't done it. But it's here. So it's something to look forward to. But he changed the way you can remove the screen. He changed the way the water flows through it. And it's really nice. And I'd like you to, you know, take a look and see what you think since you got it. Kyle is on the road doing the live stream with us. Appreciate that, Kyle. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you won't hit too many dead spots and get good coverage. Michael says, I want the topic, how to keep anemones from dying. Okay, so are we talking about bubble tip anemones? Are we talking about rock anemones? Are we talking about flower anemones? Are we talking about carpet anemones? Long tentacle? I mean, there's so many kinds out there. But the general rule of thumb is going to be moderate flow, good lighting, and some food. And if you can do those things, your anemone should live. Now, there are some caveats. I mean, there's actually a ton. That's why I did a whole video about bubble tip anemones that you could watch. And fortunately, that video is not crazy long. It's maybe 16 minutes long. But in essence, I mean, let's talk about the caveat. What could kill the anemone? Number one, you could have a clownfish that's way too aggressive or way too big and it's just beating it up and it kills it. And I've experienced that myself. I had this beautiful rose bubble tip that I got from a friend in Las Vegas. I was super excited to get it. I put it in the tank with 2 maroon clownfish, and the female maroon was like this big, and then the male was half her size, and she just destroyed it. I mean, she was beating it up, and she was ripping off tentacles, and I thought, man, okay, the anemone should be able to handle this. And then after a little bit, I was like, no, it can't. And I actually put egg crate in the middle of the tank to keep the fish here and the anemone on the other side, and it just kept deteriorating. It was not doing well. I can't remember what light it had on that tank, but it was only at 20 gallons or 29, something like that. So it shouldn't have been a big problem, but it ended up dying. And I felt bad, you know, because anemones are, they're really cool creatures. And by the way, I had someone from this live stream call me up this week and said, hey, Mark, I need your advice on how to remove anemones from my tank. And he sent me a link to a thread on Reef to Reef that is basically the thing that someone designed or thought up has been nicknamed the anemone cannon. So if you are feeling like you have anemones or flower rock anemones are in the wrong spot or Recordia in the wrong spot and you want to move them, the anemone cannon might be the best thing in the world for you to help remove them from the rock without any damage and with just a little bit of weighting. So all you have to do is take a sponge. And, you know, there's different size sponges for different size creatures you're trying to move. But if you were trying to remove a large bubble tip anemone, you would probably want one of those big sponges that you get at Home Depot. They're super cheap. I mean, what are they, $1, maybe $2? And they're used to clean the grout when you're putting tile on the wall. Okay, it's a big kind of yellow sponge. There's nothing in it. It's not dangerous. It's just a inert sponge. And you would take that, and then you would take a PVC pipe that's the right diameter to let an anemone fit through. So not a little skinny 1-inch pipe that's probably not going to work for a bubble tip that's 4 or 5 inches in diameter. But let's say you put in an 1.5-inch pipe or a 2-inch pipe, and you literally jam it through the sponge to poke a hole. So now it's a sponge with a donut, right? Or it's a sponge nut. And then you would slide the pipe into there, and then take the entire apparatus, the sponge with a pipe sticking out that's about this long, and just stick it on the rock and tether it down however you have to. Fishing line, rubber bands, I don't know what else. But you just want to take the sponge and press it on the anemone with the hole basically being over the center of the anemone, okay? And that way the anemone can say, well, this sucks. I don't like where I'm at. I'm not getting the light. I'm not getting flow. And it will crawl up the tube and you can just remove it. I mean, it's so neat and it can work in a matter of hours. Now, the number one rule of trying to get the anemone to climb up and out of the pipe is to make sure you don't have it set up where the light is shining straight down the pipe. If the anemone is sitting at the base and there's light shining in, it has no reason to move. But if you turn it on its side and here's the anemone right here and the light is coming down, the anemone is going to want to go toward the light. And then, you know, in the thread where this was discussed, there was suggestion about using elbow fittings and stuff to kind of deal with weird orientations. So you can just get as creative as you want. But I thought, man, that is so cool. I think this is going to really take hold with a lot of hobbyists. And you don't have to go in there and scrape it off the rock or really dig down into the crevices trying to remove one when you can just encourage it or coax it to climb out a pipe. And then even if it doesn't come all the way out, what if it's in the pipe? Well, once it's in the pipe, you can take it out of the tank and you can use a credit card or a plastic knife or a spatula or something, just kind of peel it right off the pipe and take it to your fish store for credit, sell it to a hobbyist, you know, give it a new home. But this way you're not hurting it, you're not killing it, and you're giving it an opportunity to live. Or you can place it somewhere else in your tank if that is what your goal was ultimately. You just didn't like it in that one spot because it's too close to something. You could do this as a relocation tool. But do realize anemones do move. Now back to Michael's question, how do you keep them from dying? We need to find out why they're dying. So I mentioned the possibility of a clownfish hurting it. If the water parameters are kind of crappy, they usually can tolerate that, but the better the water quality, the better the life of your livestock. And then finally, again, lighting. Lighting is so important with anemones, and maybe the light fixture you have over your tank just isn't enough. Now, how would we know if it's enough? You would base it on the other corals you have in the tank. If it's a bunch of softies, none of those are light demanding. But if you have LPS corals, if you have clams, if you have SPS corals, chalices, then these are corals that need a lot of light, then technically you should have enough for the anemone. So we need to figure out what's causing it. Is it that you're getting them and they're sick? Are you getting them and they're too small? Are you getting them when they are not being acclimated properly? I mean, there's a lot of different things that come into play here. So maybe just watch the bubble tip anemone video, and if you ask more and give me more detail in this chat, I will come back to your question and we'll address it some more. Rick says, your thoughts on TCU beating Baylor in the last 6 seconds to remain undefeated. Go Sports. Dances with Fishes says, I don't do Facebook. I'll catch you everywhere else, Mark. That's okay. That's okay. I get it. The thing is, it's there for those that want to use it. I understand. Jason says, for the record, I'm feeding the Interruptus angelfish. You mean you're eating one or you're feeding one? I would love to hear that you have one as well at this point. Mina says, after 3 years in my system almost 3 years in my system, is it ready to keep Acropora thriving? What are some of the easier to keep acro species? I would say the ones that have been around the longest would be the easiest ones. So anything that doesn't cost a lot is going to do a lot better than the high dollar one. High dollar ones are the first to die. And trust me, that's no fun. I mean, that's just burning cash that you don't need to burn. And I mentioned I bought a nice acro at Aquashella or Macna basically 2 months ago, and I saw it in my tank for like 3 days and it just vanished. Somehow the urchins probably knocked it into a spot, and I have no idea where it went. I have no idea if any of it survived, and that was some money. So I mean, but specifically, I would say blue tort, green slimer, and these are nicknames. So Acropora tortuosa, Acropora youngae. I would say, trying to think of other acros by name. Acropora turaki. I really like the Acropora efflorensis, which is one that tables out. I mean, it makes a disc with all the little beautiful branches coming off the tip. That one's a little harder though, but that's the one I want in my tank. Red Planet is very popular, very pretty. ORA frags those, and they are in all the fish stores. And if your fish store doesn't have ORA corals, you can request it and they'll bring them in. So you have a lot of options there that could possibly work. Ideally, you go to your fish store and you see what's available and you find what fits your budget and you get a few pieces and you see how they do. That would be my guess here. I don't think your tank needs to be 3 years old to be successful with Acropora. What your tank needs is stability, and 3 months. I mean 3 months would be really premature. It can be done, but it's premature. 9 months to 12 months, the tank is now stabilized. You've learned to overcome some mistakes you've made during the first 9 months. And now it's kind of settling in and starting to take off. That'd be a great time to start planting acro. So at 3 years, you probably could put in almost anything and it should be okay. Now, I know you posted a picture in Club Milo's Reef of a couple of new ones you got recently. You're wondering about polyp extension and do they look right? And they looked perfectly fine to me. They looked 100% normal. So, I mean, you're off to a good start. I hope they do well. I did see someone post a picture of a tank today on Facebook who I'm friends with, who I've met in person, who I did not yell at on Facebook. But if you're listening, CN, the frag racks need to go, and all those beautiful acros that you have on there need to be planted on your rock work so your tank starts looking like a reef and less like what it does now. So I'm not a big fan of frag racks. I understand sometimes there's a need for them, but they ruin the look of the reef. And they almost never look good in there. Almost never. There's a couple of ways you can do something tricky to kind of do this really cool depth of field thing, which I didn't understand initially, but now I kind of see why they're doing it. But still, I mean, there should never be frag racks in the visible area of your reef tank. It should just be enjoyable. It should be a beautiful reef. And if you have to hide one, hide it in the back. behind the rock work, have your little frags there for whatever reason they're there. Maybe you didn't have time to glue them down yet. Maybe you haven't sold them yet, whatever the reason is. But they should not be the primary spot. That is supposed to be a reef tank. It's supposed to be beautiful. And next time you go to a public aquarium, look at all the frag racks they have on display. You won't find any. They don't do it. All right. Yeah, I was really trying to think of a tactful way to write a reply to that thread, and I just decided I'll mention something on my live stream. That seems tactful. Let's see. PDX Reef says, fragging corals and or fragging corals without a bandsaw. Those are great topics, and they almost are better as demonstrations. But we can talk about a couple of things where you can just use your mind to imagine. One of the things I really like are the bone cutters that kind of look like oversized cuticle trimmers, okay? They are very specific. So many bone cutters are just like, they look like big clunky scissors. You know, they're just like big chunk. And I don't like those. I like the ones that are shorter and they come to a point like an eagle's beak. And because that way you can get down into the crest of a rock work, you can get down to the frag plug, you can snip a frag off of it, or you can snip a coral. I mean, it's just such a better tool, and it's not the common one you normally buy. So when I'm at trade shows and there's a guy there with all the stainless steel tools, I scour over them all to find the one I want, like that one right there. And he's like, oh, okay. And he's so surprised when I go for the ones that are mainstream. But I've used those. They're okay, but they're not as good as the one that has the beak of an eagle. So I would definitely, or a hawk, or some kind of bird that curves down like that. So nice to snip off a coral. Now, when you're fragging corals, they aren't usually hard to frag. Now, it comes down to, I mean, I'm thinking Acropora in my brain. Sorry. Let me think. You could be talking about any coral under the sun. If it's an LPS coral, like a hammer, or a frog spawn, or a torch coral, they have a skeletal base that looks like fingers, and then on the top of each of those fingers is the meaty tissue with the polyp. And you can cut the bottom finger off, any of those fingers, just with your bone cutters. And you could also use a hacksaw blade, and you could just use the blade alone and go ch-ch-ch. It is super brittle. It's almost cutting balsa wood. And if you use bone cutters, you will crush through it. It won't just cut clean. But those are usually the techniques. I've even seen people just take a screwdriver and pry, just snap it off. So that can be done too. I do like using the bandsaw. It's so much better, but it's an expensive tool. But once you own one, you're thinking, man, this thing is awesome. I bought my bandsaw, 5-6 years ago at Macna. Came in a huge tall box. Took it on the plane home. Or maybe I paid for it at Macna and had them ship it home. That might have been it. But I've had that thing forever. And I'm still using the original blade. I've been super lucky. I haven't broken the blade once. And every time I'm done using it, I rinse it off really clean. Rinse it clean, let it dry. I take the blade off and wipe it clean and coil it up and put it somewhere safe. And I put the whole thing somewhere safe. And then when I need to use it again, I set it up. But there's been lots of times where I didn't do that. Now, if we were talking about Acropora, let me go to that because it's an easier one to frag. And Acropora is just a bunch of little fingers. And I mean, they're little tiny twigs, right? And you can cut them super easily with just about any tool. It could be the dikes they used to cut wire with, the bone cutters I was mentioning. Again, the screwdriver technique works if you're trying to break off a decent piece. A utility knife would not be a good choice for that. It's just too difficult. But some specific, and then sometimes even just using the forceps and twisting can break off a piece, but maybe not as cleanly as you're hoping. And then if you're trying to take that frag and put it on a frag plug, a technique that is really nice is to get a sanding sponge. You can buy these sponges at Home Depot for, I don't know, a couple of bucks. And it's just a soft, squeezable sponge that's covered in sandpaper on all 6 sides. And you can take your Acropora and you can just drag, the base of the Acropora, you can just drag it across the sponge to get a nice smooth surface. Blot it on a towel to dry it off. Put a daub of glue on the frag plug that may be in a nearby rack or some kind of holder next to you, and you just take the coral and put it right on top of the glue and wait, I don't know, 10 seconds or so, and then you can let go and go on to the next one. And you can just work your way across, and you could have 10 frag plugs in a row next to you, and you could just do the sanding of each one of these acro frags or whatever the frags are, sand the bottom to get them smooth. The sanding sponge would also work with some LPS corals if you wanted to get a smoother, straight base, but the bandsaw would do it so much quicker. So I would suggest that. I'm trying to think what else you might frag. That, I mean, I don't like to frag things like anemones or fungias, and people do it, or scolies, people do it, and I just don't want to do that. Those things are just, they're beautiful, intact animals. I don't like to try to cut them up. I'm not a coral seller, so I have zero desire to propagate and make many more to sell. That's not my goal. There are people on this planet that have done all kinds of crazy things with different corals to maximize their inventory, so they can sell a lot of these. And I understand you're trying to make money, but they are animals and they are living, and they, I don't like to put them through hell. So if it came to Montipora, that one, like for example, tabling Montipora or the scrolling kind, that breaks off just by grabbing your finger. It's like a potato chip and snap off a piece. Sometimes the easiest part to break off is the dead center of the flower, because it's the prettiest part and it's the newest growth, but it's the smallest. So it's the least likely to break as you're snapping it off. And again, putting in a screwdriver and just prying up slightly, that little cone in the center can come out cleanly and could be a really nice item to place somewhere else in your tank or to sell to someone. All right, that's a few things. And I do have a fragging video on my channel here that you guys can watch later on, where I actually show what I'm doing and how I'm cutting and how I'm dipping and how I'm gluing. And I talk about using the putty technique with pegs, which are rigid airline tubing. And the pegging technique is not what most people like to joke about. It's actually a way of planting the corals on top of these air hoses. And then if you have a lot of holes drilled in your rock work, you can just take that coral and just put it in any hole on its peg. And it is a great idea someone came up with. I think he was up in Canada, and he shared his technique. And I was like, that's so smart. And so I started doing it. I started mentioning it. I did it in my Aquascape demos, and I did a little bit of it in that video. So if you want to check that out, it's on there. PJ says, can Chemcast... I don't know why that happened. Can Chemcast acrylic be used in a DIY sump? It definitely can. It's my favorite to use. Chemcast GP would be the stuff that you want to use to build things, and then you will end up with a nice, beautiful, watertight, with very good clarity and good strength. So I would, if you can get your hands on that, definitely do that. That's a great question. Let me see. Look, I did a different angle for you guys today. Boom. Well, this is kind of a weird question. Quimbulus says, my Monty is bleaching in little circles at a time, the same size as the colored specks on the coral, colored spots on the coral. You know what? Well, this has been going on for a few months, almost killed the entire thing, but now the tissue is growing back. It almost makes me think you have something eating it or biting it to create these little circles. So have you heard of Montipora eating nudibranchs? Because if you've heard of them, they may be in your tank. Now, normally they breed on the underside of your Montipora, and then they crawl up. As soon as they hatch from their little eggs, they immediately start eating the meat of the coral and work their way around. And then, you'll see the parents on the top of the coral having a nice, delicious meal, and they will bite into it and put bite marks. The fact that the coral is kind of coming back is good news, but the question is what caused those little white dots, those circles, that, those spots you're mentioning. But it sounds like something's eating it rather than it's just being a problem. Now, there is another chance that it could be something as simple as during your water changes, that salt crystals are falling on your coral and burning holes into the corals and leaving burn spots. And then after a while, the coral heals and starts growing back. So it could be something like that as well. So could it be that any chemicals you're adding to the tank, alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, potassium, salt mix, any of those things could possibly be hitting the coral directly? Again, if you're working in your tank and you get something on there accidentally, you can always take a turkey baster and just blow it off and protect the coral and let it settle down to the sand bed. But I don't know if that's what's going on with your coral, but maybe it is. Thomas says, how can I bring down my nitrate to 75 ppm? I would love to know that as well. There's different products on the market that might help. Nitrate R is one that I sell, and it is a resin you put in a reactor, and you hook it up and just let water flow through these beads. And over time, it will start to bring the nitrate down. And 1 jar of nitrate R is rated for a 100-gallon aquarium. So yours is 75. You would use about 3/4 of that jar in a small reactor of some kind and set up the flow very slowly because it's very, very buoyant and it will float up. And you don't want it to float up and come out of the reactor. And you can hang a reactor on the back of your aquarium. It doesn't have to be in sump. So that is something that might work. Of course, if you just want to be a little bit quicker, if you do a 50% water change on your aquarium in 1 day, you will cut the nitrate in half. So you can do that too. Rick says, you've inspired me with your anemone tank. I added an anemone island in my main display. The non-clownfish swim through the edge of the anemone tentacles without flinching. I will never be able to say that word right, so mock me all you want. I don't care. No sting. Sometimes certain fish can actually swim right up into those tentacles without being damaged. It's pretty remarkable. I have seen tangs, I've seen copper bands, I've seen angels, and they're just like, what are you doing? You were like in the most dangerous spot ever, and they're just like right up under it, almost touching it, basically touching it. But then there are certain fish that can totally handle it. Clownfish, 3-spot damsels, bengais, they all can totally live inside anemones without any damage at all. But others can kind of tolerate a little bit. And some may actually brush against it and get stung. And you might see some marks on their body where it shows a little bit of damage. Thomas says, do you sell Phosphate RX on your website? Yes, I do. I've been selling it on there for a super long time. It's in the Blue Life USA section. So if you can't find it in the little search box where you just type it in, you can look on the right side of the screen. Here, I'll show you. That's the beauty of the internet, right? Let me do this. So we will go to, I can't see my screen. Miller's Reef. Oh, you don't want to see that part. Let's go to Miller's Reef. Sorry, guys. And then you can go right here to dry goods. And down here on the right, you see Blue Life USA. And then here are all the products, including Phosphate RX, which is right here. And Phosphate RX is $30, and it ships for $6. I think it's trying to load my shop area again instead. All right, so anyway, that was how you do it. Go back to my camera, because now we've lost everything. Oh, I've broken it now. There we go. All right, I'm back. Mike says, I'm about to place an order. I have the VCA Flex. You have the VCA Flex Series. I do, and they are squishy. The entire nozzle, not just the end of it, the whole thing is squishy, and then it presses on to a knuckle that screws into your plumbing. And I believe the 3/4 comes with it. Let's take, oh, no, I'm wrong. So whatever you have right now, this will just press on to that. So here it is. And I'm sorry, let me switch cameras again. See if we can get back to where we were. Right here. So you can see this is the flex nozzle. See, it squeezes. And this end squeezes too. And you would just press this onto the knuckle where your current one is, and then you'll have your random flow. And then one of the sales pitches about this, I mean, this is what I have in my reef right now. One of the sales pitches is like when it's got coralline on there, as you squeeze it, it breaks off even easier during the cleaning process, which is kind of cool. I haven't tried that yet. But yeah, the 3/4 comes just like this. The 1-inch comes with the knuckle I was describing. Reefkeeper says, how's the Achilles? Super shy. I mean, I wish it was out and about all the time. I wish it was swimming with the pack. I wish when it was time to feed the tank and you saw all the fish gathering, it was right there with everyone. It hasn't done that yet, but it's only been in the tank for a short time. How long has it been? A week? 2 weeks? It's still out and about. And it is a beautiful fish. And I'll tell you, this is the one fish where you gotta have white lighting on your tank. Because in blue light, it's a black fish and the red circle is almost invisible. It's like muted, dark, burgundy, almost invisible. So to really appreciate that fish, you need really good light and you need white light so you can see all the color. Hang on, let me scroll up here. I don't understand what's happening. Oh, Free Swimmer asked a question. Will the Fiji Cube 2,400 gallon per hour overflow box work with a 1-inch plywood tank? And I'm not 100% sure. Might need to ask them directly. It comes down to the length of the bulkhead. You know, can it handle a 1-inch gap between the inside and outside parts to do what you need? But you might reach out to them and just talk with them. But maybe, or maybe just a standard bulkhead instead of the shorties they love to use with those small overflow boxes. And that way you would have the extra threads to handle the thicker tank. And by the way, have I seen this tank yet? Can you post a picture of it in Club Milos Reef for me, please? I'd love to see it. I love plywood tanks. They're really cool. Coddy's Reef says, hello from England. Hello from America. The whole country. Reef Keeper says, Reef Racks and a few others make frag racks that look like rock, and they are a good choice if you must have racks in the display. That's true, and I believe most of them are magnetically coupled to the tank. And so you can put like this rock on the back wall or on your overflow box and put a few more corals, which is kind of cool. Reef and Dive is saying hello to everyone. Let's see, looking for the next one. David Garcia says that the notification came 26 minutes late. You mean it was later than I am? That's impressive, because I'm always late. Gwunk Reef Keeping says, have you ever had a heater fail in the on position? Mine did, and now I'm fighting a Acropora die-off and a dinoflagellate outbreak. It's really discouraging. Yeah, if your tank gets cooked, and I mean gets really cooked, like gets up to 90 degrees or something like that, then I would say, look, my camera doesn't even know it's me. See, it's focusing on the background. I don't count anymore. I'm so vain. All right, so if your tank gets too warm, you can definitely lead into all kinds of issues after the fact, like you said. Dealing with dinos happening, with Acropora dying. How hot did the tank get? And I'm going to ask you this question and kind of talk about heaters for a little bit, because it really, there's been a big problem with everyone using too big of a size heater. And I mean, I'm seeing it constantly. And I'm blaming BRS, because every single time I hear about heaters, it's always about 800 watt heaters. No one ever did 800 watt heaters until BRS suddenly did this big video selling dual 800 watt heaters. And I'm like, that's 1600. What circuit breaker can handle that much heat, let alone all the other things we got to plug in? Number one, the general rule of thumb is you should have 2 heaters on your tank that total wattage is enough to heat up your water to keep it the right temperature. So general rule of thumb is 3 watts per gallon. There are going to be places where you need a little bit more, or you might need a little bit less. There are people out there that say, oh, I unplug my heaters all summer. There are those that say, whatever. There's lots of excuses and reasons and all this. But when it comes down to just stability of a tank, you kind of need all the gear, and it should all be available, but it should be controlled with a controller, really. And that will help alleviate a lot of disasters. But in the case of 800 watt heaters, then your tank should be really big. Man, I wish I had let me steal my phone. I need a calculator. So, okay, 2 800 watt heaters would be enough wattage for a 533 gallon system. That's a lot. So I am going to encourage you to not use 800 watt heaters unless you have a 533 gallon tank or larger. The fact is that if you have too much wattage in the heater, besides the possibility of tripping a breaker and just killing all the power to the tank, it can cook your tank. And there was this one woman that I was talking with months ago, and she was very adamant about wanting her 2 heaters. And I said, it's too much. Your tank's not that big. I think it was a 200-gallon aquarium. And she says, no, I want them. I want them both. And she kept explaining, I want them, I want them. And I was like, why are you so adamant to have 2 800-watt heaters? And then she said, well, if one heater fails, the other one will work. And I was like, oh, okay. She's looking at this from a completely different angle. If you want to have redundancy of if a heater fails, you need a second one, I would say have 2 heaters and have one in the tank and one on the shelf. And then if one fails, you find out either a notification, or you're measuring the tank temperature, or you look at your thermostat or whatever it is that gives you the clue what's going on with your tank. And then you would swap out the heater. Most times tanks can handle some fluctuation if something were to fail. If your return pump goes out, it doesn't kill the tank unless it went out and was out for 20 hours straight, right? If it was out for 5 hours, you might lose some fish. So there are things that can happen. With heaters, normally a heater tends to break in the on position. And so in the case of her 200-gallon tank, she needed 600 watts of heat, not 8. And I was suggesting she get 2 300-watt heaters. And that way, if one heater sticks in the on position, it doesn't have the ability to cook the tank. The odds of both sticking on in the on position are very remote. It's very, very unlikely 2 will stick in the on position. It's just, the odds are against it. So, and then even so, 2 300-watt heaters is only 600 watts. That still gives you enough time to be alerted the tank is getting too warm if you have some kind of a controller. So in the case of this person, Gwunk Reef Keeping said that their tank overheated. The question I have to ask is, did you have any kind of a controller like an Inkbird or a Renko controller, or is it plugged into a Reef Keeper or a Hydros controller or an Apex controller? Because all those things are designed to measure the water of the aquarium at all times and then give power to the heater or take the power away from the heater so it can't cook your tank. If you don't have any kind of a controller like that, I sell some of them, and they really would pay for themselves through a sense of what's the opposite of despair? You can feel comforted knowing that you're protected now. You know that you can just pull out your phone in your pocket and you can look at the tank temperature as much as you want, day and night. You could be in bed, wake up at 3 in the morning, what's my tank temperature? And you could check it without getting out of bed. So it would be really good to not have too much heat for the tank, to have the right amount, and then split it across 2 heaters or even 3, so that way you can protect yourself from cooking the aquarium and losing livestock and leading to other issues like the dinoflagellates. So I'm really sorry that happened to you. And I do talk about heaters a lot on this channel. And I hope that you can figure out what you can do to make sure this never happens again, so you never have to think about it again. And be sure to warn others so that they don't have it happen to them either. Andy Parsons says, what is the longest you've had a new wrasse hide in the sand? I asked because I got a new silver-bellied wrasse 3 weeks ago, and it's hid in the sand for 14 days. Well, there is a chance that that fish is on a different clock internally than your lighting. I had someone that had reverse lighting. They ran their tank lights all night long that lived in Dallas. And they said, hey, Mark, we want to give you this wrasse. We know it'll be happy in your reef. I said, oh, okay. And I put it in the tank, and it just vanished. And I never saw it. And I said to him, what is the deal with this wrasse? I mean, I hope it's okay. And they said, oh, it could be it's on a different schedule. And I was like, okay. So I was kind of watching for it. And there'd be times where I saw it late at night swimming around the tank, even though the lights were off. And I thought, that is crazy. It had not synced up with my lighting schedule yet. But then when it finally did, then it was out and about regularly. And wrasses, their internal clock is insanely accurate. They can just know your lights are about to blink off, and they will literally go to the sand bed where they want to go tuck in for the night, and they will do it like a hover or a twist, and then they will dive in as the light shuts off. I mean, just like instant. They don't wait for the light shut off and they dive for cover. They go in as the light turns off. It's insane. And I've seen this hundreds of times with wrasses. So there's a chance that your wrasse is coming out and getting some food while you're sleeping or early in the morning, or maybe while you're at work. It might be on some weird schedule. or it could just be really hiding for some other reason. Maybe some other fish is really bullying it and it's scared to come out, but it should be emerging and maybe hanging out inside the rockwork, staying safe where it can't get picked on. I mean, these are just some things that can happen. But I remember mine went on for a few weeks too. So I wouldn't be super worried, but at the same time, I totally get where you're thinking, I may not have this Rass anymore. It's been weeks, you know. So good luck, and I hope that it comes out soon, and make sure that you're feeding at different times of day in case it's coming out at some weird time so we can get a snack. Paul Mansell asks a very pessimistic question. How many corals do you have to kill before you have to say this hobby is not for you? All right. Why are anything dying in your tank? Okay. That should be your first question. And why is it happening? What specifically is going on? I mean, if you just had a series of unfortunate circumstances, this thing happened because the heater broke. This thing happened because the lights never came on. This thing happened because I changed water with fresh water instead of salt water. This thing happened because I didn't test my water. I mean, you know, there's 4 different reasons why you lost coral, and each one was independent of the other. So you learned from the first one, you learned from the second one, you learned from the third, you learned from the fourth, and you stop. If for some reason you're just not having luck with corals, the question is, what coral is it you're not having luck with? And should you focus on other corals, or should you just focus on what's in your tank for now that's doing well and try to determine what is causing corals to die? It could be a contaminant in the system. It could be a contaminant is getting into the system every day, from aerosols to air fresheners to well, I said aerosols, but like hairspray and things like that can actually get into the tank and cause damage that can hurt corals. It could be things on your hands. I remember talking with someone who was a mechanic and his tank wasn't doing well, and he works on cars all day long and he uses the pumice cleaner to scrub his hands clean. If he reaches in the tank, whatever is on his flesh can hurt the livestock. So, I mean, if you're a heavy-duty smoker, the smoke can really affect the tank and affect the corals and affect everything. So there's a lot of different things to come into play, but the question is, what is it that you're buying and why are they dying? I mean, is it even they're getting shipped to you, but they're dying in transit, and by the time you put them in your tank, even though you did everything right, they died? I mean, there's so many variables, but the bottom line is, if you're fed up with things that are dying, stop buying things for now. Just stop and enjoy what you have. Just enjoy the livestock that's doing well, and then 3 months from now, 6 months from now, try another frag and see how that does, rather than getting a lot of frags and seeing a lot die. Mahmoud says, I am needing to dose massive amounts of alkalinity and calcium to maintain my levels. As a result, my salinity is rising. How do I counter all the leftover salinity to maintain salinity? Yeah, the excess NaCl that you mentioned does happen from the sodium chloride. It comes from sodium. It is sodium chloride. Comes from the calcium chloride specifically, more than the alkalinity. But you say massive amounts. So tell me what size your tank is and tell me how much of each part you're putting in, and then I will answer your question. So I'll be back. I'll be back to your question. Dances with Fishes says, where do you get 1-inch lock line? Probably BRS, possibly VCA. I might have some, maybe. I feel like I have some in a box. But the one I have is really specific. It's not your normal everyday lock line. Amazon. Christ says, was thinking of doing a huge water change in my 40-gallon reef. Should I expect by doing that it will throw off all my parameters? Or should I just do it slowly? How can we trust our salt mix? Okay, that's 3 different questions. I'm going to answer them all. Number 1, can you do a huge water change? Yes. Should you expect it to throw off your parameters? No, if you match alkalinity, temperature, and salinity. If those 3 match, you can do your giant water change and nothing should be affected whatsoever. And you don't have to do it slowly. You can just do a big water change. You can drain out half the tank and put in 20 gallons of new water in there, and your tank will be fine. In the next hour or so, it'll look back to 100% normal. How can I trust the salt mix? Okay, that's the 3rd biggest question of all. And salt mixes are perfect until they're not. And every single brand on the market has had an issue at some point where some people had their tanks affected, including myself. So if you have a salt mix that is always working well, And it's the same mix you've been using. So in other words, it's the same bucket of salt. It's not like a new bucket or a new bag, but it's the same one you used last time you did a water change. You should be able to safely mix up 20 gallons of salt water, do your 50% water change, and not affect your livestock at all. But if you just recently bought a brand new bucket or box and you haven't thoroughly tested it, there's a chance that it may not be perfect. So what I like to do whenever I open anything new, like a brand new barrel, bucket, box, bag of salt, I will then do all the tests I can. I measure it for alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, potassium, salinity, temperature. I want to know if my RODI is 0 TDS. I mean, I try and check all that. And if all those come back good, then I'm like, all right, I can do my water change without too much concern. But if there's something really missing, like alkalinity, that could hurt your tank in a big water change. So that's the answer to your questions. Gavin says, I drove from Colorado to Dallas only for it to be cold in Dallas. Man, it is cold. This morning when I got up, and I don't get up early, it was 34 outside. And only right now it's 41. I mean, it's still cold outside. But fortunately, I have nice warm air in here. The thermostat is set to 61 in here, and I don't think it's 61, but that's what I had to set it to feel comfortable. And initially, you know, I've been using this as a split air conditioner system. And I was very excited about that, and it did a great job keeping the temperature nice when it's 105 degrees outside. But I hadn't tried it for heat yet, and I wasn't even sure how to do it because on the remote there's nothing that says heat. And I thought I bought a split system heat pump. Oh no! So I had to dig out the manual and flip through it. And you know, the snowflake obviously is cold, and then there's one that looked like the sun. Well, apparently the sun is heat. Like, okay. So I switched it on. I set it to 75. I was like, whew. That's too warm for me. So I've been bringing it down. And just before the stream, it was 64. And I was like, nah, I'm too warm on camera. I got to cool it down a little bit more. Gwonk says that his tank up to 85, 86 for maybe a week or two. So why did it take so long to bring it back down to your normal temperature? What was going on for those 2 weeks? Were you traveling? See, I'm going to keep asking you questions. You have to keep coming back and typing back. And I'm glad you have an Inkbird now. Mina says, in my theory in regards to taking 3 years to finally keep acros thriving is I started with 100% dry Marco rock, and it took much longer for the system to truly mature. Any thoughts? Still too long. 9 months, a year, 12 months to 15 months maximum. Definitely could handle acros. Joe Waiula, the 20,000 gallon reef, he drained it down, took out every drop, scooped out every ounce of sand, threw it all away, got rid of all the rock, threw it all away, got all new Marco rock, filled it up, and he's got a thriving reef. And it's been running for, I'm thinking he's been running now for about 12 months straight. And I mean, huge colonies of Acropora and Montipora and Stylophora and all the phora. And it's looking really nice. I can't wait to go see it again. But I would just say 3 years is more than enough. You could have done it 2 years ago and probably been looking at bigger corals right now. Thank you, Andrea. Sense of security. Nice. Andy says the Rass is out now, thankfully. It's been acting like it's been there for years. Yeah, isn't it funny how that works out? Rather Be Traveling says, what dosing pump would you recommend for a continuous pump for Culk Stirrer? This one, right here. This is the X1 Pro T continuous duty dosing pump. It's from Comor, and it runs nice and quiet. And it is designed, it's a stepper motor, and it runs. And I've got these in stock and on my website. You can buy one. There's 3 left. That is the one I can ship to you on Monday. Smed, you beat me to the water testing. I got up today, I said, okay, I'm gonna make coffee, eat a little bit of breakfast, I'm gonna test all my tanks. And it didn't happen. But it's gonna happen before, I've got somewhere to be tonight, but it's gonna happen today after the live stream is over. Reef the Sea Forever says, what do you think about fauna marin coral food? I haven't tried it, so I don't have an opinion. Okay, Mahmoud says, I have a 260 gallon tank. I moved to a much bigger house. The pH is 8.3 to 8.4. Due to much lower CO2, I'm dosing 8 to 900 milliliters per day of each part. That seems really high. Let me switch cameras again and get my calculator. Because I can't believe it. Let me see. Let me just take something here for a crazy idea. 220 you said, right? 260. Yeah, you're using way, way more than I would think. Back in the day when I was, oh, let me do one more piece of math. 260. Yeah, same number. That's crazy. Okay, cool. My math is fantastic. Okay, first of all, let me just get this camera set and then I'll come back to you here. When I ran my 29-gallon aquarium, I used 15 milliliters of alkalinity and calcium to maintain my reef. I used ESV's Bionic. And then when I ran my 55-gallon aquarium, I needed 35 milliliters a day for alkalinity and 35 milliliters a day for calcium. And again, kept the numbers perfect and I grew lots of corals. Okay, your system is 260. Just using the math I was using of 15 and 35, I was right at 164 to 165 milliliters per day to maintain your size tank. So I don't understand why. I think I know why, but I'm not 100% certain why your number's so crazy high. But if you're having to pump in 800 to 900, I have a feeling what's happening is the stuff is precipitating out as it hits the water and just settling on the bottom of your sump, and the sump is turning white and flaky and it's got all kinds of crap in there because it's not dispersing into the system. That is my theory. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong because you have the tank and you're there to see what's going on. But when you're dosing any kind of additive like alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, potassium, they need to go into an area of super high flow, like where the water's pumping into your tank. We're going to borrow this little nozzle. Here's my water shooting in the tank. It's coming out so hard and fast, 1,000 gallons an hour, right? 2,000 gallons an hour. It drips right here. And as every drip hits, it just dissolves, 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 dissolves. And if you do that, as it goes into your tank slowly, it will completely keep your numbers up and not become precipitant down in the sump area. Now, if you are dosing in the sump in some area, maybe it's the refugium, maybe it's the skimmer section, maybe it's the return zone, wherever this stuff is dripping in, you need a power head that's keeping the water just churning. I mean, you could take a small power head like this little Synchro Nano, and you can see the power head right there. And you see the water goes in, and then it shoots straight up. And you can set this on the bottom of the sump and have the water shooting straight up, and you have your dosing lines above dripping in as the water's shooting up, and it's just tumbling the water and mixing it quickly. But you're using, I feel like you're using way too much additive to maintain your numbers, and they shouldn't be needed that much. You're using 4 times as much, if not more, than what I think you need for your tank. Or the stuff you're using is just so diluted and so watered down, it just can't do the job. And you might have to actually try a different brand. That's a slight possibility, but I think it's the former. I think it's not mixing the system, and so you're having to put more and more and more because you think you don't have enough in there, and it's not doing your numbers. So that would be my recommendation, is to do that first of all. I would try to make sure it's dripping into an area that has a lot of good flow, whether it's the display zone itself or in a very high volume area of your sump. And I want to go back up to your first question. Yeah, and then if you're not putting in so much of these additives, your salinity will not be affected, and you won't have to worry about course correcting by taking out salt water and putting in fresh water to get the salinity back where it belongs. Okay? I hope that helps. And feel free to talk to me about it in Club Milo's Reef, because that is why we're here. And you can show me pictures, videos of what you're doing, what you're dealing with, and I can hopefully help you with it. And I can learn about your system, which would be really interesting. Larry says, how do you bring out the best colors of corals? Consistency, dosing, light spectrum, additives, feedings? I recently added a dosing pump adding the AF components 1, 2, 3. Well, if you're using Aquaforest products, I have a feeling you're going to see those amazing colors shortly. I remember when I joined that group, I joined it because of the eye candy. I mean, the corals are just insanely beautiful. And I thought, man, I wish my tank looked like these. And it wasn't enough for me to say, let me change to the Aquaforest method. I mean, there's a couple of things that come into play. Number one, if you own boring corals, the odds are not going to turn fantastic later. Okay. I had people tell me in the past, you sound like you know what you're talking about, but your reef looks like crap. And I couldn't disagree. I was unhappy with my reef. I felt like the corals were muted. It wasn't doing well. And then the webcam was doing the tank no favors on this live stream. So I did the reset of the tank, and this was years ago, and took out a bunch of blah corals and put in some nice ones, and the tank got a lot nicer. And then, it grew in really fast. I had to do another reset to make room to plant new corals again. And I've planted in some really nice corals over the last year, I'd say the last 12, 13 months. And the tank's really pretty right now. I've shared some videos. I shared some last week. And it's doing really well. But, okay, so specifically, lighting is very important. Your stability of your water parameters is very important. And then adding the lacking trace elements from doing ICP testing will help you enrich those colors that are lacking. It's one of those things where you can't just pour something in and say, okay, here's some iodine, that'll fix it, that'll make it better. That's not how that works. You need to know how much you have, you need to know how much more to add, and you might have to do an ICP test once a month for 3 months to kind of find that sweet spot. And then you're like, okay, my tank needs 1 drop of iodine every single week to maintain iodine. That's perfect. Also, I need to make sure that my salinity is actually 35 ppt, not 34.6, not 34.2, not 35.7, 35 ppt. And if I'm right there, then all my other elements and trace elements will all kind of line up in the right density to get the results you're hoping for. So you're going to want to figure out what's lacking and increase it. And if there's something you have too much of, you got to find a way to bring it down. And then, of course, stabilize it and to keep it stable day after day, week after week, month after month. And if you can do those things, you will get some remarkable corals that'll look fantastic. Now, also, one more thing to keep in mind about these corals. We see them, we fall in love with them, we think they're gorgeous, we want to own them so badly, but then we put them in our tank and they're not nearly as pretty as the picture we saw when we bought it. You're in an auction, you're on a website, you're at a fish store. You're always looking down on the corals because that's how they sell them. It's very rare you walk up to a tank that's just filled with corals like this and you're like, I want this one and this one and this one. It's usually that you're looking down in a shallow tank and you see them from above when they're their most beautiful. And little frags are bursting with color. They're fantastic. And then you take that fantastic looking thing and you put it in your tank and you look at it from the side. It's not nearly as pretty, which means you need to get up on your stepladder. You need to look down from above and see how it's doing. Is it fantastic still, or is it blah? And that way you can kind of start to, reason with yourself and what's actually happening with your aquarium. The feeding's not so much, but there's nothing wrong with feeding your tank. So if you are trying to feed corals, there are a lot of products. There's the Red Sea AB Plus, I think it's called, the green glowing stuff that's got amino acids in it. That's something you can use to feed. Amino acids is kind of one of those 50-50 things. Some people swear by them. Others say they can't tell the difference at all. But amino acids, as far as I understand it, they prompt or create the desire for feeding. And so having foods with amino acids in them is good, or dosing amino acids before the feeding period, like 10 minutes before, would be really smart. So you've got a couple of choices there when it comes to that. You can use broadcast foods like Benarif, which I like a lot because it doesn't create cyano, it doesn't raise your nitrate and phosphate, it doesn't affect them at all, and it's so small, planktonic sized, that even the smallest SPS mouths can eat it. So hopefully all those factors, if they are all aligned perfectly, you'll end up with some gorgeous corals. But if you haven't joined the Aquaforest group yet on Facebook, go join them and become part of their followers, and you will probably end up having a fantastic looking tank. And then make sure you show pictures of your tank to us in Club Milos Reef. Mondau says, newbie reefer here, very grateful for the info on your channel. I'm wondering what's the difference between soda ash and sodium bicarbonate. Thanks. The difference between the two is that one has been baked to remove all of the CO2 trapped in the powder so that it becomes soda ash. So when you buy baking soda, man, I hope I say this right. If I say this wrong, I apologize. I almost always Google this stuff first when I have to write a reply to someone. But you buy your baking soda, like Arm & Hammer baking soda, and that I believe is sodium bicarbonate. Then you put it in a shallow pan, like a pizza pan, and there's a DIY article on my website that shows you exactly how to do this. It's super easy. You set your oven to 300 degrees, you pour out the box on the pizza pan so it's a layer of white dust. You just shove it in the oven, and you let it bake for 45, 50 minutes, maybe an hour, and then you take it out. It doesn't look cooked. It doesn't look brown. We're not trying to roast it. We're just trying to bake out the CO2. And then you pour that dust into a Ziploc container of some kind that can keep it sealed, and now you have made your own soda ash. The benefit of soda ash is you can add it to raise your alkalinity. I hope I said this right. Again, take this with a grain of salt. I might be saying this incorrectly. It should raise your alkalinity without affecting your pH. If you use sodium bicarbonate, it has a CO2 in it. No, soda ash raises alkalinity and pH. Sodium bicarbonate raises alkalinity without the pH. So it would actually bring your pH down a little bit. I think I've got that right. I think. What's the worst that can happen? This will be on YouTube forever and people will mock me incessantly. Google is your friend. That's my last thing to tell you. Google is your friend. Look it up. Mike says, I put a fish in the peacemaker for 3 days, and immediately thereafter, I assume, a cherub angelfish started picking on it. I put the fish back in the peacemaker. Any thoughts on how else to introduce? You could possibly catch the cherub angel and remove it from the system, and then release the fish that's been in the peacemaker. And then like a couple days later, put the cherub angel back in the tank and see what happens. It could be that the cherub angel and this fish you got are natural enemies and are not going to get along. I mean, just because we put them in that box does not mean it's guaranteed everyone's going to get along forever. In theory, we want that to happen, right? But I'm always, when I'm shopping for any fish, I always try to see who are their friends, who are their enemies, what is their diet, what is their need, how big does the tank have to be? I mean, I want to know it all. But you didn't say what the fish was that's in the peacemaker in the first place. So sometimes the aggressor needs to be removed from the tank and reintroduced again, and sometimes it helps dissipate the anger. Another trick some reef keepers do when they have fish squabbling, they even rearrange the rock work to change all the territories so that no one says that's my spot, because it's missing. It's been changed, and that sometimes helps a little bit. And sometimes you just have to let them squabble and kind of let it ride out. Now, if it looks like life and death, and I mean, it's going to kill the other fish, yeah, I intercede. But like the Achilles, I put it in the tank, seemed like no one cared. The next day, the coal was chasing it. I was like, oh. But then I would watch the Achilles swim up to the coal like, I'm still here and breathing. What do you think about that? And then the coal's like, oh, really? And they went after him again. And then the Achilles came back up to him like, so is that the best you got? And now they don't care about each other at all. So sometimes it can work out. But if it literally looks like it's terrorizing the fish, freaking the fish out, it's scared and hiding in the corner, it's breaking out an ick because it's so stressed, yeah, you have to get involved and jump in and remove it and put a divider between them and kind of figure out what the problem is. Okay, Guang was answering my question from before about why the tank was so warm for so long without any knowledge of it. And he said, I just didn't put my hand in the tank for a while and I don't use a controller. It was only when I checked the salinity with my hand checker that I found out the temperature. Okay, well, you know, they even have those strip thermometers that fit on the front of the glass with a sticker where you can just look at that and check the temperature. I have always had some kind of a thermometer in my tanks. And then when I had my 280 running, it's a bigger tank, and I would sit in my easy chair across the room from this 6-foot aquarium. And so I bought something from Amazon or probably Marine Depot called Big Temp Alert. It's about this big, and it hangs on the wall up high. and it's got a long wire. And the top number is the temperature of the room, and then the long wire, it's designed to go outside a window. So you could like look at it really quick and say, okay, it's 77 inside, it's 41 outside, oh my God. But you can take that probe and put it in the water and it'll tell you the tank temperature. And I had that for the longest time and loved it because I could just look at the wall and I saw the tank temperature. And because I was being cheap, oh, I remember the days of reef keeping. So I had this system. Because my tank used metal halides, it would get warm from those lights. And the fish room behind the 280-gallon tank was a portion of my garage. And my garage was not warm by any means in the winter. And so what I would do is I'd open the door a couple of inches and just leave it like that. So the cooler air came into the fish room and the heated air was pulled out, from a vent fan in the ceiling. And that helped to stabilize my tank temperature. And so I would just open it during the daytime for a couple of inches and then I would close it. And I remember specifically, I was on one of my MACNA trips and I open up, Apex Fusion and I'm looking at it and my tank temperature is too cold. It's like way too cold. Like I want my tank at 77, it's like 75.6. I'm like, oh. And so I text my son, who I know is sitting in the room next to the aquarium playing on the PlayStation. I'm like, would you please go close the door to the garage? And he's like, fine. That's the text I get back, right? So I made him get up, walk across the room, and close the door so it'd quit bringing in cold air into the room so that the tank wouldn't get so cold at night. But the big temp alert is really nice because not only can you just look at a distance and look at your tank temperature, it doesn't cost much, and it even has a little alarm thing on there. You can actually set it if it's between this range and this range, or if it gets too cold or gets too hot, it makes a beep. So that could be another nice thing for having. But owning the controller is great because now you should be able to open a cabinet door and see the number on the front and see what the current tank temperature is. But these are some other solutions that work as well. And at the very least, a glass thermometer, suction cup to the front of the tank where you can just you're looking at your tank, you're cleaning the glass, you check the temperature, you feed the fish, you top off the water. Should be your bare minimum in every tank. And I always have glass thermometers in my house. I lose them and I buy more. I go to the fish store and they're like $3. And I buy like 3 or 4 at a time and I stash them everywhere and I can never find them. One day I'm going to find like 500 of those in my house. But I have one always handy so I can check things, whether I'm checking the water of a brand new fish that I just received, whether it came home with it or it was shipped to me. I put the glass thermometer in there and check the temperature. But the big temp alert would do it too. If I wanted to just go that route, I could just hang it on the wall, stick the wire in the bag. So, I mean, just having something that you can visually look at besides the weekly testing. I mean, temperature is something I check all the time. All the time. I don't know how I couldn't do it all the time. And I'm not saying that to put you down at all because I'm not. I'm saying I get it. Hillbilly Reefer says, how often do I need to change the rubber tubing on the Camor X1 Pro? I don't know. I think it lasts months, like way better than the Versa. If you're worried about what I told you last week, the Camors, they seem to go forever. I'm running several Camor pumps still and haven't changed the head on them or the tubing in forever, and they just keep putting liquid in the sump, into the system. So I don't think that that's something that's a major concern. I know the Camor FX STP, which is another continuous stepper motor dosing pump, that one and that one was running around the clock 24/7. And I think I had to replace that tubing like every 4 or 5 months. And so I bought a few extras to have on hand so I would just be ready to swap out. Hey, Evan, welcome to the stream. Hey, Denzel, what are you doing here? Thomas says, I have an aquatic life RODI system and my TDS is reading 17. Should I change out my carbon filter? You would probably need to change out all the filters, sediment, carbon, and DI. Of course, Winder Water drips iodine daily after just talking about putting it in once a week. But, I mean, as long as you know that your number's not getting too high, that's all that matters. If you overdose iodine, it can really hurt fish. They'll start gasping. It can cause some other problems in the tank. If you have a lack of iodine, you'll have problems with like shrimp and crabs not molting when they should be molting. So you want to have the right amount. Well, Denzel, I want to see your new acrylic frag tank idea. Larry says, I have metal halide with a 250 watt 20K bulbs. I will look into ICP testing. I have a couple of pastel colored corals. Okay, that's a good start. The purple stylo, and I'm adding Oyster Feast, Acropora, benefits. Well, you're adding all the stuffs. So yeah, you're pretty much there. I think the trace elements part is possibly what you're lacking to hit that amazing sweet spot that just makes your life seem so much more amazing. And then Larry says, which clam do you recommend? Well, I love the Maxima. I've always loved it. And if it's aqua blue, it's the first one I add in my cart. Reef Keeper says, you got it right, Mark. Most reefers typically use soda ash for maintaining levels with the add bonus of pH boost. Sodium bicarb for making large corrections without spiking the pH. Okay, thanks. I can tell you this. This was a real frustrating thing for me back in the day. I used to use, well, I told you I used B-ionic. It's called ESV's B-ionic. B-ionic. And because it was, you know, I needed more than I wanted to buy from the fish store, I tried to buy buckets of it. And we would do group buys in our club at DFW Mass. And so I would get 2 other people to join me, and we would share the spoils of the 5-gallon buckets. So I ordered, you know, both parts. And I didn't know the difference between sodium bicarbonate and sodium carbonate. And I literally read the instructions on the website and ordered the wrong one. So you get this bucket with about this much liquid in the bottom, and you're supposed to add RODI and then roll it around on the floor to get it mixed up, and then it's ready for use. And so I mixed it up, and I don't know if I started using it yet or if I just realized I made a terrible mistake. But I contacted them and said, hey, I've got this bucket, but it's definitely the wrong one. And I added the water to it, and they're like, well, there's nothing we can do for you. It just cost too much to ship back. They didn't want a bucket that's 5 gallons of liquid. And so I was sitting on that stuff forever. And they said, out of all the hobbyists, I can't remember exactly, but I feel like they said 1 out of 10 hobbyists wants that bucket. Everyone else, maybe it was 1 out of 100, but it was like almost no one buys that bucket. That's why they were so surprised I ordered it. I was like, well, dang it. Why didn't you email me and say, are you an idiot? Did you order this one on purpose? And, you know, man, I was so mad. So anyway, wasted money. And the group buy people didn't want it either. So I was stuck with this bucket I really couldn't use and ended up just having to eat the cost. You know, I mean, that's all there is to it. But, you know, when you know what you need to have, you'll order the right kind. So, but yeah, I've made those mistakes in the past. Winterwater says, I dose iodine daily because that's what the moonshiner's method suggests, as it always is showing 0 on my ICP test. After doing that for a couple of months, it's starting to show up a little. Well, okay, which iodine are you using? Because that has a huge bearing on this. If this is pure iodine, if this is concentrate iodine, if this is Prodibio iodine, you know, I mean, they're all made differently. And some are way more watered down than others. And yeah, you probably could put that in absolutely daily, and it may not even show up for a while. I can tell you, I always am tracking the iodine level on my aquarium because I want to know what's going on with that, because that's an important one. And I put it in my tank every 15 days. And when I was doing my crazy back-to-back ICP testing, I had put in Prodibio's IOD Plus, which is this stuff right here. So I put that in my tank, and then like 5-6 hours later, I took a sample out to ship off to ICP, and it said, warning, you have elevated levels of iodine. And I was like, no, I literally just dosed that today. That's not high. And of course, you know, it's going to break off because you put this in every 15 days. And so it was neat because I saw the result of what I did. I put something in, I sent off a sample, and it showed a higher number. And of course, then my next ICP test, the numbers were completely normal again because it wasn't right after putting this in my tank. But I like to see those things. I like to see where something came from and how it affected something, and proving that it's working. It's not just me just taking a bottle of some magic elixir and pouring it in and saying, okay, hope that does its job. I mean, it's nice to actually know what it's doing and why it's doing it. Okay. All right. Fair enough. All right, guys. Well, we've been talking now for almost an hour and a half. Why don't we wrap it up? We've been talking about a lot of things. I want to mention that water testing should be done every single week. And I tell you that every time I come on the live stream, and I know many of you don't obey me. Be like Milev, test your water. It really is important to know your parameters. I'm going to go inside. I'm going to shut down this show. I'm going to go inside. I'm going to test all my stuff because I really want to know what's going on with it. And that way I can make any kind of corrections before I start watching corals deteriorate. A couple more questions. So Jonathan says he has a bacteria bloom right now. Someone else one of our moderators, Keith, recently suffered from a huge bloom. He didn't know what was going on. His water was really cloudy, and he couldn't figure it out at first because he was using blue lighting. And then turns out it was a big old phytoplankton bloom or a bacteria bloom that was green water. And he hooked up a UV, and within a matter of 4 days, it completely cleared up again. So if you have a bacteria bloom that's big right now, what caused it? What did you put in your tank that made this happen? We want to make sure we're not adding more to the problem. If you are dosing vodka, for example, you could be feeding a bacterial bloom. If you just put in Live Rock Enhance, you could get a bacterial bloom that will dissipate as long as you don't put in more, because it literally releases bacteria into the water column to help eat waste. So, I was told by Tulio, when you put the stuff in your tank, don't do a live stream because your tank's gonna be cloudy for a couple of hours. Like, okay, good to know. But usually, within a few hours or so, the water's clear again. So if you have a bacteria bloom that is long-term, you may need a UV to resolve it. But you also want to know what caused it in the first place, if you can identify that. And that way you can maybe adjust the dosage of what caused it. Or maybe you're just trying to do triage. You're trying to fix something that came out of nowhere. Sean said, did you give an update on the 27-gallon? I did not. I did share a couple of videos as stories on Instagram where I showed that algae growing really tall. I've been saying it's sargassum, and a couple of people said that's not sargassum. So I don't know what it is exactly. I'm going to send some pictures to a friend of mine and let him identify it for me. But it was growing from nothing. It was a nub on the live rock, and it grew these blades. I'm like, oh, that's kind of pretty. And it got bigger and bigger, and it stretched almost up to the top of the tank, which I thought was awesome. It was just doing this thing, swaying back and forth. And so I shared the video on Instagram because I said, if this goes to the top of the water, that'd be really neat. It reminds me of the kelp forests at the, I think it's the Monterey Bay Aquarium. They have these fantastic strands going straight up. So anyway, I was really loving it. And by the next morning, the thing had ripped in half and a big piece was floating through the water like one of those basket starfish swimming through the water column. Looked neat, but it was going to get sucked into the Nero pump, so I took it out and put it in the Refugium for now. But it's doing really well. It needs a water change now. I'll have to do it tomorrow. But it's doing really well, and the little angelfish is happy. All the fish in there are doing fine. I got some green algae growing on the sand that looks like bryopsis or something. I'm probably going to see what I can siphon out or pluck out with tweezers to kind of clean up the sand a little bit. But other than that, yeah, it's the easiest tank I've ever run. I just put in a squirt of food each day, and I just let the hydros control it. Let's see. Yep. So if you're gonna do what I suggested to test your tank today, we want to check all the things: alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, nitrate, phosphate, temperature, salinity, potassium. These are the things I check on a weekly basis. They allow me to make sure the tank is gonna be okay, and increase or decrease whatever is being dosed to make sure that it's not getting too much or too little of what it needs. And if you're doing this every week, things will not surprise you and turn into a nightmare disaster situation. So please don't just look at it and say everything's fine, or look at the corals and say, yeah, it's fine. It's not fine. It's delicate, and it needs things, and we need to love on it and spoil it and keep it happy. So I really recommend that you test your water every single week, no matter what. Just make it your routine. Force yourself to do it. If you hate testing water, at the very least, get one of these smart stirrers. These things are awesome. It's a magnetic stir. You put your Red Sea beaker in there. It's got a little bead in the bottom. And instead of having to put in a drop, and shake, this thing spins. It's awesome. This thing's $35. It's worth every penny. You charge it with a USB cord, and it holds its charge for like 2 months. And then it will just turn, you hit the button on the front to turn it on, you hit the button to turn it off. It just mixes and you just see the color. It's so nice. It's so easy. I love this thing. That's why I keep ordering them, so that you guys can keep ordering them. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you guys have a great weekend. And I think we're coming up on Thanksgiving pretty soon. So I will do an update to say where I'll be, if we'll do a live stream next weekend or not. I'm not positive. I'll get back to you. All right. Bye, guys.